Hello, BookTube. It's the last day of April, which is naturally tempting for BookTube folk to start talking about what they're going to read in May. I've already talked about this and written about this quite a bit, but I figured a dedicated video on my channel wouldn't go amiss, wouldn't be a bad idea. I've been watching various booktubers make their plans for May, including the new video on the BookTube channel Read by Fred. I'll leave a link to it down below, in which he talks about the books that he'll be reading in May. It caught my attention because there are two kinds of Read by Fred videos. In one type of his videos, he has his hair long and down to his shoulders, and he looks like Kull the Conqueror. And in other videos by Read by Fred, he has his hair pulled back tight and looks like Kull the Conqueror's mild-mannered Canadian accountant, George Frobisher. And this was a Kull the Conqueror video where he talks about the books he's going to be reading in May. Now, it would take me a bit of time, even by the length standards of my own videos, to do that sort of thing for myself, because I do nothing else. I only read and fuss over the baby bean. So I want to give sort of highlights for May. April is still ongoing. My reading month in April still has 12 hours left. But my reading stats for April were really good, even for me, even by my standards, they were really good. And they're going to get a little bit better before midnight chimes. And I'm hoping for the same sort of success with May. So I have on the trusty iPad mini here, I have some books. As opposed to just talking about things, I thought I would also show you covers so that you have something to look at other than me and Frida. Of some books that are coming out in May that I'm either looking forward to or that I've read already and really liked, that I thought I would put on your radar. This is not a comprehensive list. The comprehensive list would be well over 10 times longer than this. And this is also not a list of favorites. This is not a breakdown of my reading experience in May. I could do that at the end of the month. But obviously, as you'll see, there are some titles on this list that I'm not looking forward to reading, or that I read and hated. So it's just part of what I do. It's like I've mentioned on this channel before, we all set a kind of a landscape of what we want our reading to be. We all do that, and we do it for what is ultimately, end of the day, going to please us the most, right? We have all sorts of specialist readers on BookTube, and I love that. We have all sorts of all people who do only rereading, a few people who read a great deal of new releases, much like myself, and that is my remit, is the new releases in the American book market for the 16 or 17 genres that I read regularly. All of them, or as close to all of the major releases in those genres as I can get to. That gives me the most reading satisfaction, even if the individual books don't. But the first one that I want to show is something I've shown on this channel before. I wanted to mention it again because it certainly will not disappoint me. It certainly will not. This is Atoms and Ashes, A Global History of Nuclear Disasters by Serhii Plokhy. That is the American cover. I believe that is Chernobyl, which of course is the most famous nuclear disaster of all time. But this will have all the others as well, including a lot of the ones that aren't that well known. Let me see if we can deal with this here. That's good enough, isn't it? Yes? We don't come to this channel for tech. Anyway, I don't know if I will convince any major publisher to let me review this for them. I've reviewed quite a few of this author's books. I will definitely review this one, but I'll probably do it on my own venue, Open Letters Monthly, or Open Letters Review. Then this next one, it could be interesting. It has an interesting premise. It bothers me right from the get-go, but that's a bugaboo of mine. This is by Gregory Forth, and it is called Between Ape and Human, an anthropologist on the trail of a hidden hominin. And this is about Homo floresiensis. This is about a very diminutive kind of human on the island of Florensis, the Florensis Islands, that has been discovered through tiny fossil remains and has been nicknamed hobbits because of their size. This author has talked to people who live and studied the folklore records of people who lived in this area for eons and believes that there's a good chance that Homo floresiensis is still existent, that they're still extant. somehow. Uh, the reason why this title bugged me from the start is because it makes no sense. Between ape and human makes no sense. Humans are apes. Humans are great apes. We're the only ones who can say that we're not, but we are. We're taxonomically we are great apes. So between ape and human, I think I know what the author or the person whoever came up with the book's title means. But Homo floresiensis was not an ape in the sense that this title means. They were a kind of human. I think there's no chance at all that they are extant any more than I would think that Bigfoot is extant. But this kind of thing, I mean, this author will have spent time in the trenches in a way that I've never read before, certainly in a way that I've never done. So I'll give it a try. Maybe it will be really good, really interesting. And this next one is a novel. It's by Chris Holm, and it's called Child Zero. And it is not explicitly a COVID novel, but it is a pandemic novel. In this case, from the descriptions, an Uber pandemic. A disease that just can't be affected by any kind of antivirals, that can't be stopped. And what happens if you're in a desperate fight against that sort of thing, where basic medicines aren't working anymore? What do you do? I haven't read it. I don't think I've ever read this author, but I'm very interested in any kind of a subject like that, especially since in a lot of the active serving medical professionals in hospitals, like for instance people that I know at Mass General here in Boston, are ready to talk to you about the decreasing effectiveness of standard antibiotics, of standard antivirals. That a lot of the standard treatments that you go into the hospital expecting and taking for granted are increasingly not working as these things mutate far in excess of the advance of the medicines themselves. I don't know how much of a role, if any, that will play in this book, but it doesn't matter anyway. It's all about how it's told if it's a novel. This next one is something, again, that I've showed on this channel. This is by John Marshall, and it's called Clash, Presidents and the Press in Time of Crisis. And it goes back all the way to John Adams. But its most interesting part, this is one that I've read, and its most interesting parts are in contemporary times. So George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama. The chapter on Barack Obama is very good. And of course, the whole thing is bookended by Donald Trump, who called reporters the enemies of the American people, and was happy, exultant, to call them out, to call individual reporters out by name, in the not too thoroughly hidden hope that some of his unhinged cult followers would kill those reporters who dared to say negative things about him. Donald Trump spent 4 years and has spent a year and change since then constantly whining like a little baby about how unfairly he was treated by the press. Unfair. It's just unfair. You're just so unfair. He's never been able to point out any unfairness. He's never been able to point out any factual inaccuracies. You're just so unfair, with a little stomp of the foot. But he wasn't the only example. This book does an excellent job of sort of flattening those dichotomies and showing you that the presidents have always had a more or less antagonistic relationship with the press. No other president called for individual members of the press to be executed, but other presidents did jail members of the press without any habeas corpus, without anything like that. So a fascinating look, and the author does a really good job, rolls right through the subject very smoothly, to the point where I was wishing for a longer treatment. The chapter on Ronald Reagan is a tough president to write about. I haven't found a whole lot of examples of anybody doing that intelligently and using really good sources. And this does. I wanted a whole book on Reagan and the press. So it's a fascinating subject. It's got a lifespan. The clash between presidents and the press started really with John Adams, and it's going to end very soon. I mean, in our immediate future, that clash is going to end completely. So this is kind of a beginning to end book, and all the more interesting for that. Okay. Like I mentioned, not every book is going to be a positive reading experience, but I feel duty bound by the remit I've imposed on myself. This is Here's the Deal, a memoir by Kellyanne Conway, who was a special counselor to President Trump and one of the most vociferous and outspoken liars on his behalf for years. For years. Just quickly and glibly and professionally and openly lying to anyone who would give her a platform, to the point where major media outlets sometimes stopped giving her a platform because they knew they weren't going to get any answers out of her. They knew they weren't going to get anything true out of her. They were going to get instead Donald Trump talking points that are easily factually contradicted. They knew they were going to get that delivered with a smile at rapid fire pace, so they just stopped inviting her on, which led all sorts of people on the alt-right to say that she was being silenced, that the leftist media was reinforcing an information bubble for its listeners, which is pretty rich. If you're saying that your free speech is being impinged upon if people don't invite you on and pay you an honorarium to lie, that's pretty rich. The book is going to be more of the same. The book, this is the person who coined the term alternative facts. This is the person. This book is going to be solid lying from start to finish, by a woman who's hated by her own husband, hated by her own daughter, hated by everyone in Washington, hated, as far as I know, by Donald Trump. It's just you make a deal with the devil, and this is the book that results. But we shall see. I don't know what we'll see. I'm not expecting anything good from it. It'll be May's version of Trump's disgraced Attorney General William Barr's book. Epstein dead? What? I was trying to set them straight over there in the White House. I wish they'd listen to me. I'm like General Patton if he looked and sounded like Deputy Dog. This will be May's equivalent of that. It won't be the only one. I'm sure there'll be others. But I suffer so that you don't have to. Then this next one is an anthology that's edited by Carrie Hughes and also Jim Butcher, the best-selling novelist, Jim Butcher. This is Heroic Hearts, and it is an anthology of urban fantasy. I've felt a little guilty about bashing on urban fantasy during the length of FFS, the February Fantasy Stories that the Bookish Brides put together. One of the categories there that we wanted to pay attention to was urban fantasies, and I've never liked urban fantasy. It's always struck me as very pandering, very self-serving on the part of authors. All right, I'm an author, but I'm also a tobacco addict and an alcoholic. I have bourbon for breakfast, and I can't write a Tolkien-esque fantasy in which any of my characters exalt in my own drug addictions, and I want to do that because I'm a lazy derivative writer. But an urban fantasy gives me a chance to do that. It gives me a chance to have, a fairy or a fae at the bar saying another bourbon, because that's like really cool or something. I'm doing it again, aren't I? I'm bashing on urban fantasy. It's not all like that. There's some that I like, and this is an anthology including a new Dresden Files story. So maybe there's some names in here that I don't know. Maybe there are some efforts in here that I will like. Oh, okay. This next one is we go the spectrum on this May sort of TBR. This is a kind of sort of TBR, an abbreviated TBR. Some of the books that are on here already irritate me. From Ape to Human already irritates me. That's like from dog to miniature schnauzer. That makes no sense. But it could easily win me over. Then there are some books that I just actively hate. I already know that I hate them. Something like Kellyanne Conway's book. I know that there's no chance that book is going to do anything that I find interesting or pleasing in any way. It's new, it's out there, a few people will read it. I feel like I should know what it says. And then there are, on the other end of the spectrum, there are some books on this May TBR that I already know I'm going to love, where the author has such high credit in the Bank of Steve that they would have to do 200 pages of smutty limericks to do anything to hurt their credit score. And this is one of those authors. I've mentioned this author on this channel before. This is the romance author Vivienne Laurent. This is her new book, How to Steal a Scoundrel's Heart. And then you have a tiny little Pomeranian down at the bottom there. I've read everything this author has, all of the novels this author has written. They're tremendously good, just so much fun. I don't have any doubt that this will be. It's, as you can see from the cover, it's kind of a modern day Regency, uh, which always makes me pine a little for the old fashioned Regencies. But I'll take the modern. Modern ones are immensely clever. They're so much fun. Then this next one, I think we've seen it on this channel already. This is by Jack Gedney, and this is The Private Lives of Public Birds, where the author is not heading into the bush to find a moa or tuatua. Instead, he's just paying attention to the birds that live or migrate to his neighborhood in California every year. He studies what they look like, he studies how they act, and he does a bunch of research to figure out, in order to relate their natural history. It's a slim thing and a very good thing. It's a very enjoyable pop nature book, especially if you have your meals out on the porch or the patio and you are accustomed and fascinated by the birds who flit by. I am. I am always fascinated by these things. The Bean and I are outside all the time. If the weather ever warms up here in Boston, we'll be spending even more time outside. But not only that, I have a group of brawling South Boston Irish Catholic house sparrows that live in the bushes outside the house. They spend all day in the bushes outside the house, and they live in the wainscoting, just that's attached to the second floor of the building. So they live here. They don't migrate at all, and I know them well. I feed them every day. They know me, so they don't flee when I'm just standing there watching them. I get to know all about how they act, and also in a roof just across the way of another house, a family of starlings has established a nesting network inside the roofing of the roof itself. So there's the gutter that goes around the roof and drains down all the way down the side of the house, and they have managed to work an opening in that gutter and live inside the roofing right there. And I watch them come and go all the time. I know their habits. I know the individual birds. If you're that kind of a person, you don't need to go out strapped with binoculars. If you're that kind of person who's just fascinated by birds, ordinary everyday birds, and what they do and why they do it, this is a delightful book to have. Absolutely delightful. Okay, this next one, another thing we've seen on this channel, this is Eric J. Dolan's book, Rebels at Sea. Privateering in the American Revolution. This will probably be the big American Revolution title until the autumn. And it's about letters of marque. It's about vessel captains, including plenty employed by John Hancock, who weren't part of any kind of fledgling, newly minted, and authorized American Navy. But they weren't straightforward merchantmen either. They were doing things on the high seas to thwart the British and to make tons of money. There's lots and lots of colorful characters here. So I haven't actually got to this yet, not in its entirety, but it's a great subject, and it's a period that I love. If you have an American Revolution buff on your list, this is an obvious choice for May. Then another book that I have mentioned, this is by Halek Kochansky, and it is Resistance. A big, comprehensive study of civilian resistance to the rise of the Nazis, and to the establishment of ironclad Nazi rule. This is the ordinary people, not so much the high-flying, cinema-worthy figures, as the ordinary people who resisted this change to their world right from the start, and did so at increasing peril of their life and livelihoods and the lives of their families. I think this is based on a huge amount of new research, a huge amount of new, synthesizing of older research. Looks to be definitive. This next one is also something that we've seen on this channel. Haven't got to it yet because it's a May release, but I'll be getting to it, I think, this weekend. This is by Carl D. Marcy, who's a psychiatrist, and this is Rewired, Protecting Your Brain in the Digital Age. And it's all about, it's part diagnosis, all about what digital media, social media, always screens, are doing to our brains. What are they doing to our attention span, to our retention of facts, to our temper, to our ability to sift through information to determine what's reliable and what's not? What are they doing to all of those cognitive capabilities? And also, what can be done to reverse those deleterious effects or to prevent them from happening in the first place in the case of young people. I often find books like this to have a very off-putting Chicken Little type alarmism to them, and I'm hoping that this book doesn't. We shall see. The author has, mentioning in the trenches, the author has been in the trenches on this subject. Okay, all right. This next one is also an author whose credit could not be any higher in the Bank of Steve. I know that I will love this book unless it's a drastic misstep. Those do happen, but I'm not expecting it. This is The Bride Goes Rogue by Joanna Shupe. I think Shupe or Shoop or whatever her name is. Lovely cover there. Obvious giveaway that this is a contemporary Regency romance because everything is naked and explicit. there are no high collars and white calf gloves here or anything like that. This is the Fifth Avenue Rebels series. I've read all the other books in this series. They've all been great. So I'm very much looking forward to this. I don't want to block the beam, but I wonder if the light would be better. Oh, that is better. Well, you can do both, though, right? There we go. For the glare, I'll show all these at the end, just so that you can see them this way, just so you'll know, so you'll be able to see them. Then the next book I've mentioned on this channel before, it's historical fiction by Con Iggulden, who will be well known to a lot of you. He's done a huge number of historical fiction books. This is called The Lion, and it is a novel about 5th century Athens. It's a novel about Pericles, but not really the bearded and dignified Pericles who's giving speeches. This is about a far more, from the description of it, a far more sweaty and active Pericles, which is always fascinating. There's plenty of information. Even if you just wrote a novel based on Plutarch, you'd have plenty to go with, plenty of great stories. I wonder how many of them will show up in this book. This next one is, for want of a better term, a Trump book. It's not the same kind of Trump book as Kellyanne Conway, but nevertheless, it requires getting down into the muck, reading about Donald Trump and his administration, especially the end of his administration, when he orchestrated and incited a violent insurrection to overthrow the government of my country, execute his vice president, annul a lawful election, and install himself illegally in power. Can't be stressed enough. Donald Trump did that. He did that in very recent living memory. Something without any even close precedent anywhere in American history. It was something that ought to have guaranteed almost immediately that he was either not a free man or not a living man. Instead, he is free, he is belly aching, and he is almost certainly going to run for president in 2024. Mind-boggling. This book is about, mainly, from what I've been able to gather, this is about that horrible transition from Trump to Biden. It's called This Will Not Pass, by Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns. What is the subtitle? Trump, Biden, and the Battle for America's Future. These two authors have been making the talk show circuit. Their book has been making the talk show circuit in excerpt. They leaked a lot of really salacious excerpts from the book, and of course they infamously have audio on House Minority Speaker Kevin McCarthy saying one thing and doing another, just being a feckless liar. Not a big surprise, but it's still stark to hear audio back to back, as all the cable news shows have done, of him saying, I didn't do X, and then hearing audio of him saying, I am going to do X. There's a lot more in this book than that, and I'll just have to see, I mean, how well it's done feels almost beside the point, but I'll still be trying to concentrate on that. Then we have translated Russian literature. This is Time Shelter by Georgy Gospodinov. Time Shelter. I like to get as much translated literature on my list for any month as possible. It is, after all, a category in my year-end Steve Reads roundup of the best and worst books of the year. Literature and translation is one of those categories. And I've heard, I know a couple of reviewers who have actually already read this or dipped their toe in it, who say that it feels really special, even in translation. So I'll definitely give it a try. Then this next one is a New York Review of Books reprint. The New York Review of Books Classics reprints have fervent fans all over the bookish landscape. I am one of them, certainly. I love the endeavor. I love the existence of it. It's not often that the NYRB will come out with a title chosen by their board of editors that I actually like, that I actually want to see or am interested in. This time they did with the uncollected essays of Elizabeth Hardwick, one of the great figures in my own profession of book reviews and literary responses and literary essays and criticism and whatnot. They did a volume of hers, the collected essays. Now they're doing a second volume with a dumb title, of course. The book collects the essays. They're not uncollected. But what the book means is previously uncollected essays. This is all sorts of other stuff that wasn't in the first volume. It's going to be a delight, an absolute delight to revisit these pieces. Although, in this case, I unlike with many anthologies that come out that are reprints of scattered, deadline work, in this case, I'd be willing to bet a Boston cream pie that I have read everything in here many, many times. This is an author you don't want to miss. That's coming out. I'll get it from the New York Review of Books. And then we can finish up with military history. This is something, I think I've mentioned it on this channel before. This is by James Hornfischer, and it is Who Can Hold the Sea? The U.S. Navy during the Cold War, 1945-1960. So not, the greatest generation fighting in World War II, but rather the Cold War that so many of us remember so well, where there were duels at sea, there was brinksmanship at sea, sometimes on land, sometimes in the air, but a lot of these conflicts happened at sea, and so it's a rich ground for a new popular history, and there haven't been many of them. There really haven't been many of them. This is a thing that I bet there'll be a lot in here that I've never read in a book before. That for its precedence in terms of reading, I would have to go back to scrutinizing and reading between the lines in 4 daily editions of the New York Times, things like that, from the period. So a breath of fresh air, very happy to see this. Looking forward to reading it, seeing if the narrative is as good as the subject matter choice. And that's it. That is a kind of a very abbreviated May TBR. Put these things on your radar, let you know that they're on my radar. Lots and lots of other books, lots and lots. And of course, I plan to read a lot more than this, but I thought I'd put those out there. I mentioned a few of these on a live stream, a Steve stream, but I never know how many people slog their way through those things. So I thought I'd do a separate video. And I'll leave a link to Read by Fred, which is, this time around, it's Read by KULL the Conqueror. But tomorrow or later this week, it could easily be read by Mr. Frobisher from Central Accounting. So there's some deductions here for axes and tigers that I think we need to talk about. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.